All right. Let's move from the founding.
Yeah.
Let's bring it up to close to, not completely, but close to the Civil War. What happens there that changes this from an idea amongst elites, and that's where our founders were, they were the elites, who, as you said, pulled themselves out of their own culture to look at it and go, something is wrong with our culture, to within 2 generations, it begins to seethe to the point where common people are now pulled out of their culture as well, going, there's something wrong with it. No, there's something right with it. No, it's our tradition, it's our culture, it's a bad culture.
It's a story filled with drama and incredible characters. I'm a student of political philosophy. I love the books, I love the great thinkers, I love John Locke and Adam Smith, right, and all these Montesquieu. And I used to place great emphasis on those thinkers when I would write about and describe the American Revolution. I've come to think that I'm still happy that those thinkers wrote their books, but I actually think they were less important now than I used to think. For this reason, those colonists, for 150 years, from the very earliest settlements up to the American Revolution, look, they were living by their own sweat.
Right.
They lived or died, right, by their own effort. And so when people like John Locke come along and make an argument, you have a natural right to your property, I think those colonists said, well, of course we do. I mean, they didn't.
I built it.
Right. They didn't need some lengthy theoretical justification. It just resonated with them. And so the ideas of the revolution were, if not universal at that time, near universal. I mean, if you asked ordinary Americans, said, do you have a natural freedom to worship the way you want to worship and speak the way you want to speak and do with your property whatever you want to do? The vast majority of Revolutionary era Americans would have said, yeah, of course I do, including many Tories who stayed loyal to the king. They would have said, well, yeah, I have a right to do with my property what I want.
Comes from an English tradition.
Right.
And so we inherited natural law, which includes this idea we're sovereign.
So this is very popular, very common, very undisputed in the period after the American founding, and then things start to change. Eli Whitney invents a device, the cotton gin. He's watching his cat one night. His cat has some burrs stuck in its fur, and the cat's sitting there with its claws picking out those burrs, and he gets an idea. Because the way cotton was harvested, it's very difficult. I've actually done it, and if your hands aren't all hardened and calloused, you'll cut them to smithereens. So it's a real hard shell, and you got to break the shell open, and then you pull the cotton fiber out, and it's wet and sticky, and there are little seeds in it, and you got to pop those seeds out, squeeze them out, and then a slave typically would put that little ball of cotton into his bag and do that hundreds of times a day. What the cotton gin did is it took away that step of squeezing the seeds out. You could just grab the cotton and put it in your bag and then shove a whole bunch of unprocessed cotton into the gin, and it would mechanically pull out those seeds. Now, as that cotton gin is being perfected, the engine that is also being developed is the steam engine. And the British in particular, they figure out how to take a steam engine and connect it to a loom. The loom is one of those great big things that goes back. It's how you.
Basically, what you're talking about is the invention of the textile industry.
Textiles, right? The power loom is
We've
how
now we've industrialized.
Yes.
Making cloth.
And they need lots of cotton. And the question is, where are you going to get all the cotton to feed into these power looms? The American South is growing enormous amounts of cotton. So it is possible to make a lot of money off of cotton. So now there's a new financial incentive connected to slavery that didn't exist prior to those two developments. Other things are happening at the same time. Continental European philosophy, they called it science. And they said the science is settled. This is as early as the 1830s, 1840s. They said biological science has settled the question that human beings are divided into races, and certain races are superior and certain races are inferior. There were fields like phrenology where scientists would study skulls and how thick
measure this
all this. and somehow, right, translated that into some racial hierarchy of being. So the scientists of the day are saying, well, it seems right that certain races should lord over and enslave inferior races. They made the argument it's good not only for the master race, the superior race, it's also good for the enslaved race because it elevates them. They get to be exposed to their superiors. That happens at the same time that Southerners in particular, Southern churches, adopt a strict textual theology. And they say, this is a complicated argument distilled down, but here's the heart of it. They say, we are Christians, which means we believe sin is whatever God has declared to be sinful. And nowhere in the Old Testament or the New Testament has God ever declared slavery to be sinful. He's never declared slavery to be abolished, just the opposite. He provided instructions on how to conduct it. There are rules in there about how a master should treat a slave, how a slave should treat a master. So you have Christian churches making the argument that, well, slave owners should be more Christian in their handling.
What I'm hearing is, after our founding, before the Civil War, you've got science saying, oh, this is all scientifically right. You've got religion going, well, of course, this is the way God wants it.
Yes.
You've got a perfect storm of keep it the way it is.
And economic incentives, right?
Right.
There are, not everywhere, not everyone, but there are slave-based plantations that are highly profitable. One of the, one of the main school of scholarship of history that came after the Civil War made the argument that, well, we didn't need the Civil War because slavery was going to die out economically anyway. It was not feasible. And it's curious because, well, slavery's been around for thousands of years. Why didn't it die out, 5,000 years ago? But more importantly, a couple guys wrote a book, this is back in the 1970s, titled Time on the Cross. And what they did is they analyzed particular plantations and they divided them into different categories, large plantations, medium plantations, small ones. And they demonstrated how many of them were highly profitable. I mean, you could be a plantation owner, and if you managed your business well, you could make lots of money. With slavery, you could make lots of money. There was also this. One of the things you talk about a lot, the work that you guys do at the Independence Institute, you talk about the unintended consequences of laws and regulations, right? People, they say something needs to be done, they pass a law, then there's all these
nothing scarier than
bad unintended consequences.
Do-somethingism of something must be done.
And there was an example of this in the founding period with the Atlantic slave trade. Many Americans agreed that this was a horrific thing, shipping human beings across the Atlantic Ocean. Many of them would die in the way. It was terrible. So the Americans abolished the Atlantic slave trade. They abolished the importation of slaves into the United States. And abolitionists thought this is a great thing. One of the unintended consequences was this now limited the supply of slavery. Slave owners didn't have the west coast of Africa, all that supply of slaves, which meant the price of slaves went way up. And many plantation owners started thinking, well, why produce cotton or tobacco
when I can produce people?
I can produce people.
Wow.
And slave breeding becomes an industry.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.